welcome back to my channel. Today's video I'm very excited to do because I'm going to be ranking all the palettes that I've tried in 2022. I have 33 spots that I'm going to be putting my palettes into ranking for you today. However, I did try a little bit more than 33 palettes and I will explain you why. Let's go over a few housekeeping things before we get into an actual ranking. So here I have two palettes that I technically purchased this year. They are from BH Cosmetics. This is a blueberry muffin and avocado toast. You may have seen them in my collective monthly haul videos that I did briefly mention them, that I did acquire these palettes this year because I didn't want to have them for me. They're also no longer available. I thought it would be a pretty fair game to not include them in the ranking. For most of the palettes that I'm going to be ranking today, I do have either dedicated video on or have them featured in some type of a get ready with me where I do still show you a look tutorial. Plus, I will have a few playlists linked for you in the description box for you to check out. Here on my channel, I have video types of where I share one palette with multiple look tutorials, and they are filmed in a very specific and unique format. As a creator myself, I have come up with a filming and editing style that is very unique to my channel. A lot of my subscribers do find it very helpful and educational in the way it is filmed. A lot of you that became my subscribers because of those tutorial videos. So I do invite you to check out my tutorial videos because those are the videos that I really put my heart and soul into. And also, if you're looking for inspirational looks and you just want a picture of it, I have majority of my looks as posts on my Instagram if you like to recreate them. I do invite you and encourage you to visit my Instagram if you were looking for more inspirations with these palettes. When I was putting all these eyeshadow palettes into the ranking, I did consider the price, the packaging, the quality of the eyeshadows. Are they user-friendly? Are they workable? Is it easy to work with or it's not? Does it require a specific technique? And of course, because it is technically my ranking, I did consider my preferences. So the last thing that I wanted to mention, so these are not absolutely all the palettes that I purchased this year. I picked up a few palettes just recently. So that being said, all the palettes that I will pick up since like late November and through December, I will probably put it in a separate ranking video sometime in January. So if you're new here, welcome. My name is Eve and I love all things beauty. Today we're talking about eyeshadow palettes. So if you enjoy talking about makeup and especially eyeshadow palettes, give this video a like and I invite you to subscribe to my channel before you leave today. And without further ado, let's get into ranking all my eyeshadow palettes, almost all my eyeshadow palettes that I purchased in 2022. Say that the makeup that I'm wearing today, of course, will be listed for you in the description box as always. And the makeup look that I'm wearing today is one of the palettes that I'm going to be talking about in today's ranking. So on this long list, on the last spot, I do have a palette from e.l.f. It's Cookies and Dreams eyeshadow palette. This palette was launched, I believe, back in January. Back in January, I did want to add something blue to my collection, so this little palette definitely caught my eye. And when I got this palette, I was quite disappointed. The swatches were not the worst. However, when I started applying these eyeshadows, they were absolutely not doable. Matte formulas are very dry and they do not adhere to the lid. I picked up pretty much the entire collection when this was launched, and I initially sat down to film the dedicated video for the entire collection, and I ended up scraping it because I couldn't create even half decent makeup look to show you guys. So this was a pretty big disappointment for me. On spot number 32, I do have a palette that is a new brand to 2022. I've done a dedicated video for the entire launch. This is a quad from Gwen Stefani's brand called Give. It's called Icy in color in the shade Danger Zone. It is an okay formula. It is very much workable and you can create a pretty basic look. I mean, there's only this many shades here, right? I am a huge neutrals lover. However, I do prefer neutrals. They're a little bit on a warmer side. And this is not the typical shades that I normally reach for. However, I do enjoy them. There's a time and place for cool tone looks. The reason why I didn't really reach for this palette that much is because this darker shade is full of glitter. This is why I rank this palette pretty low. I want to make a small disclaimer here that pretty much since this point on, I like every single palette. Some of them I like more and some of them I like less for one reason or another. However, there are really no bad palettes. On the spot 31, I do have a palette that is absolutely gorgeous, but there is a reason why this palette ended up on the lower spot. And this is a Gemini palette from Melt Cosmetics. From the outside to the inside, absolutely stunning. These are my shades, you guys. These are my warm neutrals. I love my warm neutrals and I absolutely love my greens. As much as this palette make me just fall in love by looking at it. It is quite pigmented formula. And by quite, I'm saying it lightly. I feel like every time I sit down to create a look with it, it was supposed to be a simple look and it just turned out to be like this big. I would wash off my face every single time. All I've done with this palette this entire year is just attempting to create looks with this. However, I have not conquered it yet. I literally haven't worn a look with this palette like out there throughout my day in this entire year. I still strongly believe that in 2023, I will conquer this palette. The matte formula is definitely a winner here in a way. There are only 2 shimmer shades here and I'm not a huge fan of them. So I'm actually very happy that primarily this eyeshadow is matte shades. On spot number 30, I have a big one. This is a Mothership Mega Celestial Nirvana by Pat McGrath. This was a holiday edition, a limited edition for 2022. This was my first palette of this size of a limited edition, a holiday edition from Pat McGrath. This is the 3rd one of its kind that Pat McGrath launched. And this is the one that actually caught my eye. My personal taste, I do love my shimmers, but I also really love matte. I really love creating the base of my looks from matte formulas. And this palette has half of the palette in matte and half of the palette as shimmers. So I really thought that it was so well balanced. Now let me give you a reason why I'm ranking this palette pretty low in my rankings. It is a limited edition. It is also pretty bulky. This palette does have a really good quality, nice full-size mirror. However, it is quite heavy. The palette does not stand on its own. It doesn't have like a proper mechanism to keep this mirror up straight. And then there are also no special shades in this palette. I would rather have it smaller, more compact with less waisted space with a smaller pans and have the price cut off a little bit. Maybe include a smaller pan with the special shades for people just to try out the formula, because I think it was just not worth the price tag. On this next spot, I do have Milk Chocolate Hershey Kisses from Glam Light. I really think that this color story is really nice, even though these are all neutral shades. They have this beautiful, very unique, like taupey undertone. And I also want to swatch a few of these for you guys. These are pretty spectacular shimmers. They're fully foiled. They are very creamy, just apply to the lid beautifully. The reason why this is ranking a little bit lower is because it is a very specific color story. Even though the shimmer shades are spectacular here, the mattes are a little bit more on the drier side and require a little bit more work. I feel like they are somewhat technique sensitive. At times I would need to switch between a few brushes and figure out like which one works the best. Also, even though I love the packaging, is a little bit harder to store. I feel like this next palette is gonna put me in a hot seat for a second here, and some of you may start throwing your makeup brushes at your screen. I think I have a good explanation for this. So this next palette is Mothership 5 Bronze Seduction Eyeshadow Palette. Don't get me wrong, this is an absolute beautiful neutral tone eyeshadow palette with a twist. Beautiful glitzy shades. The reason why I rank this pretty low in my rankings is because the looks that I created with this palette, they were pretty much very basic neutral. Don't get me wrong, it does beautiful on eyes. They look nice, but they do not look $128 on eyes. Even though I love this color story and I enjoy the looks that I create because I'm a huge neutrals lover, I just feel like this color story is almost like too basic for me to rank it much higher. The palette that is on the next spot, it actually has a special place in my heart. This is a palette that I was looking for, and when I saw this palette, I said, this is the one. This is a Cutie Midnight palette from Nabla. This is a beautiful curated blue tone palette. I mentioned then earlier in this video that earlier in the year I wanted something blue to my collection. I wanted added a beautiful blue eyeshadows, like a very nice curated blue tone eyeshadow palette that I could create a beautiful bright bold blue looks. The blue look that I created with this, it's still one of my favorites. Nabla eyeshadow formula is one of my favorites to work with. These are just like a small example to show you. They're absolutely fully pigmented. They're creamy. They're gorgeous, they're reflective, they're easy to work with. When you work with this eyeshadow, even though the eyeshadows are very creamy and soft, there's literally no fallout and it's quite impressive. So I love this palette. The reason why I rank it a little bit lower is because it is quite curated color story and I can't say that I would reach for it too often. The next palette up is going to be the Nabla palette Wild Berries. The only reason this palette ended up here on this spot is because it is more curated story, and I would only reach for it this many times on occasion when I want to create this type of color story for my look. However, guys, the formula is spectacular. Pigmentation of mattes is absolutely stunning, and the shimmer shades would give you like the wet lid effect. They're very light in texture. They are really easy to work with. Nothing budges, nothing creases, nothing fades. Even though it is a 6-pen palette, you can definitely create multiple looks within this color story. On the spot number 25, I do have Cinderella palette from Sigma Beauty. This is a very beautiful eyeshadow palette, a little bit more on the colorful side. I had fun with this palette. I've created some really beautiful looks. I do generally really love eyeshadow formula from Sigma Beauty. This palette was inspired by a Disney princess, and I think it represents a Cinderella movie quite well. The reason why I ranked this a little bit lower, I've had a little bit of difficulty with these purple matte shades right here. I found them drier and more on the powdery side. Been difficult to build this color up to this intensity, what I saw in a pan. So I ranked this on the spot 25. So on the spot number 24, I do have a palette that does have one of my favorite color stories. This is Allure 3 by Juvia's Place. This color story for being a 6-pan eyeshadow palette is pretty fun. You do have more neutral row here, and then you have like this pops of color. This shade is absolutely stunning. I apologize, my fingers are stained, but here's the absolutely stunning blue shade. The look that I created with this palette using every single eyeshadow here is actually one of my favorites. Another thing that I really love about it is that this shade seems to be brown, but it's actually dark burgundy. The reason why I'm ranking it kind of like in the middle of the way is because it is a smaller palette and you are in a way limited to certain looks that you can create with it. I think I'm on spot number 23, and on this spot I do have a palette that was not necessarily accepted by the beauty community and makeup lovers too well. However, I personally enjoyed it due to my personal preferences in makeup. And this is a Wild Greens from Urban Decay eyeshadow palette. This is definitely not like my favorite palette, but I do love corals and neutrals and greens. And I found that this palette was definitely on the lighter side. You would not get too much depth out of these looks. And I think this was the reason why a lot of people did not enjoy this palette as much. I personally found this palette being super useful for a warmer season. I use this quite a bit in summer, and I did not experience any difficulty with mattes or shimmers. I wasn't a huge fan of this packaging, even though I did appreciate them stepping out of the box and just trying to do something different. On the spot number 22, I do have this palette, which is a Rainforest Haze from Catrice Cosmetics. Again, this is a little bit more curated color story. Primarily, there are green shades here and some gold. Look at these shimmers. They're so beautiful. This is another gorgeous shade. Just look at this green. Stunning. The reason why I'm kind of ranking this palette midway is because it is a little bit more curated story, and then because there are only 3 mattes here, and technically 2 of these are just finishing lid shades. I thought I would put the sister palette on the next spot up. This is a Sandy Days by Catrice Cosmetics as well. Quite similar in the concept, but different color scheme here. Absolutely stunning shimmers. Again, I think that Catrice really outdid themselves in this formula. Even though this palette only has 3 matte shades, these are 2 matte shades. They're a little bit more pigmented. They do show up on the lid really well, and then you can definitely create an actual look using these shades. Unless you like a look with a full shimmer shades, definitely need to reach out to a different palette for the mattes. But for $12, I think this palette is spectacular. However, because it is incomplete, it's here midway. Next spot up took this new mod palette from Sigma Beauty. Absolutely stunning velvety packaging. Beautiful, very romantic color story. This side of the palette definitely has more neutral tones, and this side of the palette is just a little bit more colorful. I tend to reach for warmer toned eyeshadow palettes more often than to the cooler tone ones. However, this specific palette is made in a way that these cool tones I find very flattering on my skin tone. I can't really say that you get a lot of different looks out of this palette. This palette is pretty monochromatic. You kind of get somewhat different looks taupes, but they kind of still look the same. I love that there is a really nice gradient from lighter to darker shades. This is something that I personally enjoy when I look at the palettes. You do have a good balance of mattes and shimmers. Some of the shimmers here, they are toppers, and some of them, they're fully pigmented shimmers. So there's a little bit of versatility. However, you do in a way get monochromatic looks in the same scheme. On the spot number 19, I do have the Nubian Earth by Juvia's Place eyeshadow palette. This is definitely your neutral palette. This is a considerably new launch. I think this palette was launched this year, if I'm not mistaken. This is a palette that has a slightly different formula what we used to for Juvia's original palettes. This is a little bit drier and more firmly pressed type of formula of eyeshadows. However, this formula builds up and it is easy to work with. The shimmer shades are absolutely beautiful. Really did not experience any issues with blendability or building up the shades. I don't really think that this palette is absolutely outstanding because it's your neutral palette. However, it does have a little unique features that I want to highlight here. So this shimmer shade and this shimmer shade, these two shades are absolutely mind-blowing. Another special feature about this palette that makes this palette quite unique to my neutral eyeshadow palette collection is that undertone of some of these matte shades is more yellow. It just makes this a little bit more unique than other neutral palettes that I own. Spot number 18, I have a palette that was super fun. I had so much fun with this palette this summer, and it is quite inspirational to me. It is also from the brand that I tried first time in 2022. This is a Michaela Part 1 eyeshadow palette from Glamlight. Palette is definitely one of my most colorful eyeshadows, and I think I just jammed my nail in one of the shades. What a shame. This palette is one of the most colorful eyeshadow palettes in my collection. I really enjoy that there's just super fun and colorful shades right here. The top two rows are a little bit more neutral, a little bit more within my comfort zone. I've created some really fun looks with this palette, and it's inspirational. I've already mentioned this earlier about the formula, that the matte shades are a little bit more on the drier side. They require a little bit of a specific technique to work with, so I prefer going from darker shades to the lighter when I'm building up some of these colorful mattes especially. However, I find the shimmers outstanding. Slowly but surely, we're getting there. On number 17, I do have a ColourPop in the Springs eyeshadow palette. Very summery, very fun color story. This palette is a really good ColourPop formula, and this shade right here, this highlighting shade, is a Super Shock eyeshadow. I'm ranking this palette on spot number 17 because I would only primarily reach for this palette during warmer seasons. On the spot number 16, I do have a small palette. However, it made me interested in the brand. This was my first palette that I tried from the brand. This is a Mini Midnight Voyage from Pat McGrath. Even though it is a quite small palette, however, I find this color story pretty versatile. You can create a very pretty full matte look out of this. And then there's also two different rows. This is more neutral, and this is a little bit more with a hint of purple. This was a really smart move from the brand to launch something like this for more people. Tried the famous formula. It definitely got my foot in the door with the brand, and I ended up trying more palettes. I really love this palette. I traveled with this a few times. Obviously no special shades in this palette. So I'm ranking it today on number 16 spot is because it is somewhat in a way limited to the color story. We are in the top 15. Are you guys ready? Because I know I am ready. I feel about this palette like I love it, but I don't. I really love the brand. I've really been loving the formula. I've enjoyed the formula for years now. And when this palette was launched, I was not necessarily thrilled, but knowing how much I already liked the formula, I gave in and I got the palette. This is Empowered palette from Huda Beauty. This was their holiday launch eyeshadow palette. This might sound like I'm controversing myself, but I kind of, in a way, have like love-hate relationship with this palette. I really like her mattes. They're easy to work with. They're buildable and they're blendable. And this is something that I really have appreciation for when it comes to eyeshadows. I definitely go into deeper details in my dedicated videos for this palette. However, in a nutshell, I just feel like this palette let me down with shimmer shades. I've created some absolutely beautiful looks with this palette and I very much enjoyed them. Huda always tries to bring something innovative. There are very interesting formulas here. They're new. Like these gold shimmer shades, they are new formula to her eyeshadow palettes. Then she also included these two cream formulas here, which I actually end up loving, and I use them as my eyeliners all the time. You can see that they're really well loved here. I reached for this palette just for the cream shades. I did mention this earlier briefly that I do love my mattes a lot to create the base for my looks. However, what makes every look for me is the beautiful shimmer formula. And I feel like these shimmers let me down this time because they are a little bit too heavy for my liking. Even though they're absolutely stunning, I just feel like this palette does not have one single shade that is a lighter formula. And then there's also no inner corner highlight. If I wanted to create a full look out of this for a day wear, I couldn't, because all the shimmers are quite heavy. However, her matte eyeshadow formula is absolutely beautiful and a pleasure to work with. And the number 14, I do have another palette that I have love-hate relationship with. This is Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes eyeshadow palette. Let's just go down to business. I like this palette, but I don't love it. This palette was marketed as a special matte formula that's the easiest to blend, and then this absolutely special shimmers. I do agree that these mattes are absolutely fabulous and they're the easiest to work with. You cannot mess them up. You can be as careless with your application as you can be, and your eyeshadows just would blend themselves. Well, however, if you blend them too much, then they do blend away. So I think that there's like a thin line where you need to stop blending. And I also found this deepest matte shade is not deep enough for my liking. I do like sometimes go with a really, really smoky outer corner and create that really, really nice transitional depth to my looks. And then this shade wouldn't give me the depth that I wanted. So at times that I want like a really smoky eye, I have to reach out to another palette whenever I use this one. Even though the mattes are very easy to work with, I don't find that shimmers are very special. I found a very affordable dupe within my own collection for these topper glittery shades. It's really not as special as it was marketed. Don't take it too seriously, but I feel like I was fooled by marketing in a way, and I should know better because I did study marketing in college. I let myself be fooled. The reason why I bought this palette is because I do like neutrals. I'm a neutrals lover, and I've never tried anything from Makeup by Mario brand before. So I was just curious to try his formula, and of course it was also primarily for my channel. If I didn't have a YouTube channel, I probably would easily skip on this palette. On a spot number 13, I do have another neutral palette. However, it does have a special place in my heart. This is a Major Dimension eyeshadow palette from Patrick Ta. I personally love these two cream shades. I've used them again as an eyeliner, but they also serve you as a really nice eyeshadow base. Even though this palette is very neutral and quite monochromatic, I just think that the formula is phenomenal. The matte shades are just so easy to work with. You have a beautiful gradient of depth here. This matte shade definitely gives you the proper depth, and if you wanted to intensify that, you can use this cream shades as a basis. The matte shades would stick to the base really nice to create in this beautiful concentrated base for your look. There's a little bit more texture to the shimmers, but they are beautiful, they're reflective. Formula does not fade, it's easy to work with, and the packaging feels quite luxury. More versatility for more skin tones than with the previous palette. On spot number 12, I do have quite a palette. This is a Retro Glam palette from Natasha Denona. When I saw this palette on a preview, I was just in love with the color story. This is a beautiful color story and different in a way. I love Natasha Denona formula, and I really enjoyed all the looks that I created with this. Personal liking, I feel like I'm missing the depth in this palette. I wish there was just maybe one or two darker mattes in this palette. Spot number 11, I do have a palette that is considerably new to me, but I already had a good chance to play with it and test the formula and create really fun looks. This is an ambience palette from Ace Beauté. This is a super fun, colorful story, however, just a little bit more muted. This palette was launched not so long ago. I think it was back in October. You can definitely see the inspiration of Halloween here with the purples and greens and burgundies. This was my first time trying anything from Ace Beauté. I was quite impressed with the formula, both mattes and shimmers. The looks came out very vibrant, very rich. My dedicated dedicated video is already up on my channel for this palette with the look tutorials. Now I'm definitely interested to try more from the brand. All right, guys, we're in the top 10. Leave me any guesses in the comments below. What do you think is going to end up on my top 10? I'm very excited to share my top 10 with you. These are my favorite palettes of the year. These are the formulas that I already love, or some of them that are new to me that I tried in 2022. These are the palettes that I am always happy to reach for, and the looks that I created with these palettes are probably one of my favorites. Some of the palettes here that I tried the first time from the brand, and the formula just really surprised me how good this was. So that's why these palettes are here in the top 10. Palette that took a number 10 spot was a palette that I felt like it deserved to be on the top 10. Some of you may be surprised by this, but I really felt like this palette deserved to be here. This is a Harvest palette from Profusion Makeup. This is a very affordable palette. Let's start from that this palette only is $10. This was my first time trying anything from Profusion Makeup. I've heard good things about the eyeshadow formula from Profusion in the past. However, I wanted to try it for myself, and boy, do I not regret getting this specific palette. I was quite impressed by the formula. The mattes are buildable. They are more on that lighter side, but they are buildable and they're really easy to work with. There's no fallout. The shades blend into each other super easily, and the shimmer shades I was very impressed with. They are not your bam in your face type of shimmery shades. They're more on the subtle side. However, they're absolutely beautiful. Some of them are cream formula. Just look how stunning these are. The shimmers do not crease throughout the day. The colors do not fade. I do like shimmers. They're a little bit more bam to your face when I go out. So this is more of like a day wear palette for me. However, I just enjoy this so much. On a spot number 9, I do have tiny but very beautiful palette, very unique to my collection. This is a mini gold palette from Natasha Denona. Even though it is quite curated story and there's just this much versatility that you can get from it, I just find them very flattering on my skin. The looks that come out of this palette are quite unique. So I really love this little palette. On a spot number 8, I have another beautiful palette, the formula that I have already loved. The look that I created with this palette just stole my heart. This is the type of look that I can literally wear like every single day and never get tired from this. Love Fest palette from Huda Beauty. Not all the 9-pan palettes from Huda Beauty are successful. However, this palette was definitely a hit. We know that Miss Huda always does her warm neutrals very well, and this is what this palette primarily is. Even though this palette is considerably small and kind of curated, I still managed to create some fun looks with this palette that I do have for you to check out to get inspired. The matte formula is very consistent in this palette. There are no issues absolutely with blendability. I find that all the matte shades translate true to color to your eyelids. There are 3 shimmers in this palette. These 2 are definitely more bam in your face, up to my liking. They give you like that wet lid effect. This last one is a little bit more subtle, but I feel like there's a time and place for that. I really love this palette. On a spot number 7, I do have a palette that again is a new brand that I tried this year, and I just feel like the formula really blew my socks off. This palette came in the Advent calendar form, which I thought it was absolutely genius and super exciting for any makeup lover. It's my first time trying anything from Lunar Beauty. The eyeshadow formula is spectacular, both mattes and shimmers, and I really loved the packaging of this palette. The brand really put a lot of thought and effort into creating this launch. The smallest thing about this palette I had a small disconnect with, that the outer packaging is winter themed, and then the inside it looks like it's more of a fall. On the spot number 6, I have a super fun palette that I actually got too excited about when I got it, and this is a Hocus Pocus 2 from ColourPop that was launched this fall. I watch Hocus Pocus movie every single year. It's like a tradition. We get popcorns, we get blankets, the dogs are there, we're all watching Hocus Pocus together. Even though it is pretty colorful palette inspired by Halloween and the movie, there is still an option to do your neutral basic looks if you wanted to. Also very nice ColourPop formula, so I really had fun with this. On a spot number 5, I have a palette that is an absolute personal favorite. This is Rose Metals eyeshadow palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills. This year, Anastasia Beverly Hills came out with its newer format, larger pans eyeshadow palette. Beautiful eyeshadow formula from ABH that we know and love. Look how beautiful. They're just foily, they're smooth, they're buttery. I really love that the packaging is kind of leather and sassy. Generally, this palette runs a little bit deeper, so you would get more grungier, smoky type of look, and I'm a huge fan. And when it comes to fall and winter, I'm all about grungy, smoky eyes. Every time I want a smoky eye that is very easy and effortless to create with a beautiful shimmer. This is no brainer. I reach for this palette. On the spot number 4, I do have a palette. Let me just open it. Let me open it. This is a Mothership 6 Midnight Sun palette. I need 2 of my hands to hold this palette because it's quite a piece of work here. I mean, the packaging is absolutely stunning. Piece of art. You would say, Eve, why did you rank the other one so low and then this one so high? Is because this color story is perfection, you guys. I've created some absolutely stunning looks with this, and every single one of them make me feel a certain way. Every single one of them is beautiful. I'm not going to talk about the formula because it's literally the same like in the other palette. It's pretty consistent. However, I feel like the matte shades, there's only 3 matte shades here. They're so smartly made. It doesn't matter how you blend them, in which order, and in which combination. They always look just so cohesive, so beautiful. And it does look like you have an expensive eyeshadow on your face. If I would have to pay original price for this, I don't think I will regret it. This color story for me personally is everything. Mind you that there are only 10 eyeshadows here. The variety of looks that are completely different from each other that you can create with this is pretty amazing. I love this eyeshadow palette so much. On the spot number 3, I have a palette that's just great. It's just a great palette. It is a Nouveau palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills. This was the first palette that Anastasia Beverly Hills launched this year, and then they launched the Rose Quartz. This palette was sold out everywhere. In all my Sephoras around me and all my Ultas, I had to chase this palette and ended up purchasing this palette twice, if you know the story. And at the end, it was all worth it. It is your neutral palette, but with this beautiful pop of lilac color. And initially you would think like, what is this lilac color doing in the middle of this beautiful neutral palette? And actually that lilac color is very, very special. I created very simple but very beautiful look out of it, and I enjoyed it very much in summer. I would put the shade all over my lid and wear with half a white eyeliner and half black. So we're in the top 2, and this top 2 palettes definitely have a very special place in my heart. I will say very again. This palette that's on spot number 2, I feel like it did not get the hype and love that it deserves, because this palette is simply amazing in my book, and this is the palette that I'm wearing also on my eyes today. This is a Read My Mind palette by Nabla. And you see that my palette has been well loved and used. When this palette was initially launched, it actually did not look as appealing on photos, on the preview images. It looks so much more beautiful in person. I do love Nabla formula, like I mentioned earlier. I don't just like it, I actually love Nabla eyeshadow formula. It has all the qualities that I love and appreciate about eyeshadow formula. It is buildable, it is blendable, it has beautiful shimmer formula. Nabla has different shimmer formulas and different matte formulas. Some of her mattes are traditional mattes, and some of the mattes are cream mattes that remind me of Natasha Denona formula. However, her cream matte eyeshadow formula I find even easier to work with than Natasha Denona's at times. For her shimmer formulas, some of them are toppers and some of them like fully foiled shimmers. Look at this gorgeousness. I have no words to describe this. Pure bliss right here. For the look that I'm wearing today, I just followed this row. It's organized in rows and in squares. So if you are newer to eyeshadow palettes or larger format of eyeshadow palettes, and you may be having a little bit of difficulty how to pair which shades with which, this guides you. However, because it is also in a way a neutral palette, you can really just mix whatever you want here. So I started thinking about Mario palette here for a second, where you would get countless all day fallout. Even after you finished your look, the glitter just keeps falling down under your eyes throughout the day. This palette has no fallout, neither mattes nor shimmers. If I say I love this palette is a pretty big understatement. On the spot number 1, I just have a palette that there is not one single thing that I don't like about it. This is the palette that inspires me. This is the palette that I wanted to reach for literally all the time. This is a palette that looks absolutely stunning on eyes, no matter which colors you use, no matter mattes or shimmers, whatever you do, it just looks absolutely gorgeous. On the number 1 spot, I have Natasha Denona, my Dream palette. Now, when I tried this palette, I knew right away this is going to be my number one, even though I tried palettes after this palette and I still knew that this palette cannot be beat. This palette is perfection. The video that I filmed with this palette was the biggest video that I've ever filmed. This is a very special palette for me. Primarily neutral, but however, there's still differentiation of color. It is the most thoughtfully made neutral palette out of my entire collection. You can mix any color with any other color or 5 or 4 and the looks will come out beautiful. And it's not just pretty, it's absolutely beautiful. And it does look like you have expensive eyeshadows on. And this is not something that you can say about every single expensive eyeshadow out there. Natasha Denona, my dream eyeshadow palette, is my dream eyeshadow palette, and it's definitely a winner by far from anything else that I've tried this year. I think that was quite dramatic ending, but this sums up my video, you guys. I hope you enjoyed it and found it entertaining. Let me know if you own any of these eyeshadow palettes, if you have an eye on any of these and my review was helpful for you. If you are interested to learn more about any of these eyeshadow palettes, make sure to check out the links for the playlist in the description box. Thanks so much for watching and hanging out with me today. And if you enjoyed this video, give this a big thumb up. It does help my channel out. And if you're not yet a subscriber, I invite you to do so before you leave today. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in my next videos. Bye.